Welcome to the Bad Boss Journal, the dope podcast where you can anonymously say exactly what you think about your bad boss, toxic work environment, and find out how to handle it. Welcome to Bad Boss Podcast, the dope podcast where you can tell us exactly what you think about your horrible boss, toxic work environment, and maybe we can figure out how to handle it or basically tell you how to get out. I'm Ava.
I'm Michelle.
And today we have Amy with us. So thank you, Amy, for joining us. We're excited to have you here and to share your story.
Well, thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit or delve right into what you'd like to share.
Sure. So, several years ago, I took a job with an agency providing services for this large company in their contracts department. I was a remote hourly worker and I was assigned to negotiate commercial contracts, something I'd never done before. So, I'm excited to learn about this new skill. And at the time, it was a really tough job market. I had been struggling to find work. So, I found this job. So, I was determined to make it work no matter what. There were clues right at the beginning that the job was going to be terrible. There was a high rate of turnover, and I noticed that the person training me was really frazzled. He gave me the workflow. Here's what you do. But then he would immediately show me a shortcut and a workaround that he used to keep up with his work. And then he would immediately swear me to secrecy. Don't tell anyone I showed you that. And if you do, I will deny it because he was
Red flag, yeah.
Red flag, huge red flag. But me with my starry eyes, I didn't see it and I just
Yeah.
kept going. So I started working 15 to 20 hours a week. And after I felt a little more knowledgeable and I had a bit more confidence, about a month later, I asked my manager for more hours and he agreed. So, yay, I'm a full-time employee. I'm super excited about that. And as a full-time employee, I start getting invited to these short daily team meetings. And at these meetings, my manager would say something about the need to get through more volume and the fact that our agency contract hadn't yet been renewed by the corporate client and that money was tight, and that mistakes were not going to be tolerated. And it was pretty clear this guy was one foot out the door. He was trying to make a name for himself, bigger and better things, and he has moved on to bigger and better things. I'm sorry to say, he was gone a couple months after I started. So even though he made me full time, he never gave me benefits like health insurance or paid time off. So I'm working full time, more than full time, and not getting any of those things like my coworkers, which, it's a
What?
little soul crushing.
Yeah.
But it's a job, and I mentioned, I was struggling to find work, so I was determined to stick with it. And I still had that idea that they're going to see my hard work, and somebody's going to notice me, and I'm going to get rewarded,
Mm.
which didn't quite happen then. So the new manager comes in, and he was handpicked by the guy who left previously. He gets there and he decides big changes need to happen. So he starts making these changes. None of these changes involve getting me benefits. One of my coworkers mentioned that she'd had a conversation with the manager and they had this big, long, in depth conversation about how me not getting benefits was totally illegal. And yet he still did nothing about it. It's nothing at all because, the more money he could save on his employees, the more he looked good in front of this agency.
Right.
So
Right.
time goes by and still no benefits. I'm still working hard. And he's building a name for himself and it's working. Like people are just lavishing praise on this guy. And he continues those daily meetings where he talks about how our contract hasn't been renewed and we need money. And it's terrifying because every last time I come out of one of these meetings, I think, oh, I'm just so going to get fired any day now. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to lose this job. Even though it sucks, it's still my job. So, I don't ask any questions and I'm there longer and longer. People start coming to me with their questions and they start trusting me and this really weird thing starts happening within the team. There's 5 or 6 people working on this team. They start to align themselves in 2 separate sides. One that really likes this manager and one that doesn't. And here I am, just trying to stay out of the way so I don't lose my job. And they all start to confide in me. I become the central person. So they call me about their problems with their job or, what everything they need my help with. But then they add in how they feel about the manager and what he is doing. And they all pour out their secrets to me. And I'm horrified by this. And I'm very careful to be sympathetic and say, oh, I can see how that would be difficult. And how terrible for you. And I never take a side, but both sides of this group keep contacting me. And it goes on like this months and months. I'm sorry to say, like over a year. This just keeps happening to me, and they keep calling. And then the manager himself starts calling me, and he starts pouring out his heart about all his troubles. And I'm thinking, you're the guy who won't even give me benefits, and I'm supposed to feel sorry for you. Like, it was very strange for me.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, the personality conflicts get bigger, and eventually the complaints reach the corporate client, and they see it as a problem, even though they don't know all the nuance of it. They don't know about all the backbiting, and they fire this guy. They say they tell the agency they have to get rid of him. So there's manager number two gone. And then they finally bring in a third guy, who I thought was great, honestly, because he gave me benefits. I'm super excited. He came in and he said, I see that you work full time, but you don't have benefits. That's highly illegal, and we're going to fix that. Great. And then he says,
Yay.
I also noticed you're getting paid less than half of all your peers. Let's see if we can fix that.
What?
So he brings my rate of pay up to match everybody else. So I'm super excited about that. But the problem is, all those two sides that formed, they never really broke apart. So it
Mm.
just kept going with this new guy, and people kept undermining him and doing weird things, and
Oh
making
no.
mistakes on purpose, and rearranging files, and just doing really terrible
What?
things. At this point, I should be excited because, yay, I have benefits and I'm getting paid a reasonable rate. But I'm just exhausted. This is 3 years later, and I'm just fried. My workload increases. They've made me salaried, so now I'm not even getting the benefit of overtime. It's just 60-hour work weeks, and manager number three has no idea that everyone is conspiring against him, for lack of a better phrase. So he eventually quits because things get so pressured. People start making anonymous complaints about him, and he can't figure out who. And honestly, I have a sense of who did that. But he was such a nice person. He never thought that anybody internally would be doing those things to him, and they were. So they get rid of him, and then they start hiring managers from within, but they start hiring from these people who've aligned themselves in one way or the other. And so it just keeps churning and churning. People keep quitting, people keep leaving. And I'm sorry to say, I wish I could say I made this bold statement and I said what you're doing is wrong, and I was super noble, but I wasn't. I stayed for 5 years, and I only left because I applied for a job on a whim somewhere else, and I got it. And even now, I'm kind of uneasy talking about these people because it was such an uncomfortable work environment, and those bosses were so terrible. And I don't know that they have any sense. Like, I still hear from people from work, and they talk about, oh, you remember that manager? He was super great. You should call him if you need a job. I just think your experience was different than my own. I don't think I will. So yes, that's in a nutshell. I know it's a lot. That was my bad work experience.
Wow.
Yeah, so I like that because I was thinking about this recently, where like what were some of the red flags people see stepping into these situations? And so I love that you shared that you had clues from the beginning. The high turnover rates, the supervisor who was frazzled and swearing you to secrecy on shortcuts. And I think a lot of times, especially when the job market is strange or not, plentiful, people don't ask a lot of questions. They're interviewing, taking the questions from the employer versus asking those
That's true.
back at them, especially about the work environment, expectations, etc. Were there any other red flags that you've reflected on and thought about since, outside of the ones that you already mentioned?
When I applied for the position, one of the hoops I had to jump through was to take a written test. So the first manager, he had written up guidelines on what a document should look like, and then he sent me a separate document, and he had me go through and fix it. So redline the document and make any changes that were necessary. And the mistakes that were made in this document were such tiny. It was 6-point font in this location. It was this size of a margin here. This, like, it wasn't, here's a problem with your agreement terms related to, oh, you forgot to clarify what currency you were paying for, or who, about confidentiality. No, it wasn't the big things that you would think would be important when you're entering into a contract. No, it was very small, nitpicky things, which I think should have given me a clue how he would behave as a manager, because that little snapshot was really his personality in a nutshell. Like, he would just nitpick the tiniest thing that you would not think was even remotely important to your job, but he wanted everything to be aesthetically perfect. And if it wasn't, you would hear about it, and not in a constructive feedback kind of way either.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've had in my bad boss, not my direct boss, but my bad boss's boss, did kind of the same thing. Like, you would present a written document, and he would go and, like, this tiniest, like you said, like font, or there was a space issue, and he would send it back down the chain to be redone. But if you happen to send both the document to him and then to his boss was typically like, why did this sit another week or so out for this error? We could have just pressed on, like, with the actual execution of the plan versus
Oh, one of
there's
those
a just,
results-oriented people. Yeah.
yeah. Yes.
I will say in my current work, that is something that we end up doing. We end up having to sometimes input somebody else higher up in order to get a reply back in a timely manner.
Oh,
And
that's very
I
common, I
never really,
found.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I didn't know that because I never had this type of job. Like, yes, I've worked for companies, but there wasn't this strict hierarchy that really mattered until I worked where I am now. But it's so interesting you're talking about that second boss and that drama type of stuff that was happening, because I'm going through that
Oh.
currently. And I didn't know if, like, you had any advice for people who are going through that, because I think it's actually pretty common, because it's not only just happening to me. I'm seeing it happen in another department as well, and it's very toxic. Not at me necessarily, but it's just I can see how toxic it is, and it's a lot. It's a burden, when you are the person that people go to, and you have to hold it all in. And as a person who tries to be my most authentic self, I'm very, like, honest, and I don't like lying. I don't like living like that. And I show expressions in my face, so it's very hard for me to keep all of it together, especially if somebody's specifically asking me, "Did you hear this?"
Mm,
You know what I mean? And
yeah.
I know the answer is yes, and I'm trying to be very political, like, just
Oh.
diplomatic, I guess is the correct word.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I'm very lucky that all this happened before the advent of Zoom video calls, because I have no poker face. They would have known in an instant that I knew, because I'm a bad liar.
for me, it's mostly that I used to be a very good liar, and I don't want to live my life like that anymore. Like, I want to be honest, I want to be open, I want to be kinder. And, like, I just don't want to go back to, how I had to act when I think ultimately I used to act that way because I was almost in survival mode. And
Mm.
now that I'm not in that place and I'm, working on myself, like, I don't want to do that. So yeah, it's
So when people call, do you take on the do you try to resolve it? Like, do you talk to them and say, well, what do you
I,
think you could do to resolve this? Or are you trying to stay neutral? Because I think both
I
are kind of
do.
exhausting.
It is, you're totally right. And when you were talking about how you try to be very neutral, I do that. But then I do try to coach them
Mm,
into trying to figure out what to do. But like you said, it's exhausting both ways. And
it
what do you
really
do in
is.
that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could always say, well, if you don't like it, maybe you'd be happier somewhere else. And
I wish I could say that.
yeah,
I'm
I wish I
wondering
did too.
if, yeah, right? Like, it's always, ooh,
I think
maybe just being like, what would you do if can you just email them? Like, would we say that? Maybe you should take it
That's
up
true.
with her, or, him, or,
so.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to the reason that they're bringing it up with you. Do they think you're their friend, and they're just trying to,
mm,
treat you as a confidant and get some get some sympathy? Oh, is that happening
right,
to you? I'm
right.
so sorry. That's terrible. Or are they just the office gossip, and they just need someone to bitch to, and there you are.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, that's true. It's funny, Michelle, that you identified that, because I immediately thought that Amy was effectively the informal leader of what happened. And I've been in that situation, especially in my bad boss experience that brought me to this podcast, is that I was actually senior to my boss. So technically, I should have been the leader. And the subordinates were coming to me with the stuff he was doing to them. And unfortunately, because I didn't supervise them, it wasn't my place. So I didn't necessarily take sides, but I would like try to give them advice about, okay, if you're going to have this conversation, I don't think you should have it with that person alone.
Mm.
I think and I would tell them, document the conversation. I would also, like, because we had a sort of a, execution leadership chain and a administrative chain, I'd also tell them, okay, I would make sure your administrative chain knows what's going on because that's affecting how you do your work. So that way I could kind of stay neutral. Like I'm not leading them, but I'm trying to give them as many options to resolve their issue without having to get in trouble, if you will, with that bad boss.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Did manager number 3 who quit, did they ever reach out to you to ask you for more details about, or if you knew specifically
No,
who?
he was such a nice person, and I didn't mention it when I was telling you, but a lot of the reason that he was targeted by some of the employees, not to lump onto this workplace, was because of his religion. He was very Christian, and they found that
Oh.
funny. They found that as a reason to target him, and he never thought anyone working there would do the things that happened. I didn't have the heart to tell him. And you know what? He's such a nice person. He's actually reached out and tried to hire me at the place he ended up.
Oh,
He's like, you should come work for me because you're great. And which is very nice to hear after all that experience. But yeah, I never told him. And I don't know if telling him would make me feel more guilty that I didn't try to like jump in front of him and save him at the time. But I mean,
Right.
he did leave for a better position, I think. And honestly, all the gossip that was going around, I can imagine that it just wasn't a pleasant work environment for him from the get-go anyway. So why try to keep him there when it probably wasn't going to fix itself unless all of those people left and a whole new group came in.
right.
It's so interesting that, like with bosses, if you have a nice boss, there are people who will try to undermine them. And then
Because
when you
they think
have a
they should be in
toxic boss,
charge or yeah.
yeah. And then then you have toxic bosses, and then they're like, I don't know, maybe it's just the type of person, maybe who like they will always have an issue with that. But it's interesting that while you had bad bosses, you also had coworkers who were bad coworkers to their, like it's
Yeah, there were a lot of layers. That's when I thought when I was kind of writing up notes like what happened exactly so I can get it right.
right.
I was thinking, "Oh, there's a lot of bad things in the story. Maybe I should just cut some of the bad out so there's only a little bad, but I do want to overwhelm you." And I was trying to think like what I wonder what the qualities are that make someone a bad boss. Is it because they're trying to make a name for themselves and build themselves into something else so they don't really care? You think about people who want to become a manager, like what are the reasons you become a
Mm,
manager? Either you love bossing people around, you want the money, or you have some kind of, noble interest in helping people in whatever work you're in. So I'm not sure what all
right.
these people get wrong. Yeah, it's interesting.
That is interesting because that's literally what I was thinking. Like sometimes like you wonder if they almost started to create a certain persona because they realized that being a boss and trying to do things more amicably maybe didn't work for them. But then it's like there are people who are like legit sociopaths. So it's like, how
It's
do you
hard to figure out
differentiate
which
that?
one is this? Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
And I've there've been people who've said you should go into people management, and I always back away because I feel like it is a huge mantle of responsibility, and I don't know that I would do a good job at handling people's problems because then I think, oh, then they'd really come to me with their problems of, yeah, I need time off for this, and I don't feel comfortable with this, and that guy looked at me funny, and I just don't know if I would have the answers either. So I like having a good boss, but I don't know that I necessarily have learned all the skills on how to be one yet.
Right. But it's all I'm sure you do have the skills. But it's a lot, right? Like it's a lot to put on yourself on top
Yeah,
of.
I have a very good manager at my job right now, and everybody just goes on and on about how great he is. And at the same time, people will also mention, "Oh, but you know what? He lets people get away with things. Like he's too nice." So there's the whole other
Right.
side of the spectrum. I still prefer it this way. I
Right.
just have to I just believe in myself that I won't take advantage of his niceness, and I don't. So I think we're in a good place.
I'm so glad that you are with somebody who treats you well and, respects your work and all that. That's, because sometimes people have a really hard time leaving their jobs.
They do.
So yeah,
And
it's
when I left that job, I felt bad about it. I They were treating me terrible. I was exhausted, and I still felt guilty. I put in my notice, and then they wanted to meet with me to discuss if there was anything to do to get me to stay. And even though there was nothing they could have done, I still went to those meetings. I still was sympathetic on the phone with them because there's just something inside of me. I don't know.
I'm the same
I wasn't
way.
hugged enough as a child, but
Yeah,
I could not just tell them exactly what I thought of them and walk away. Like I still say,
I
"Oh, I'm so
know.
sorry I have to leave, but there's more money and I think it's a better fit for me and my family." And I had to come up with all these
Right.
detailed excuses of why I wanted a new job, which is really silly.
Why is it that we feel so bad when we are leaving a job? It's not, you know what I mean? Like I do the same exact thing. Are you the same way, Ava?
Yes. Yes.
What is it? Like what I think there's a lot of unpacking just with our inner, yeah, like all these, maybe there's these past traumas that just lined up to make us feel that way. It's so odd. I'm the same way. Like right now, I know that eventually I'm going to have to let go of one job because I have multiple jobs, and I don't know how I'm going to ever do it because it's just I'm like, is it my ego? Is it like it's genuinely I feel bad. I know that even if I left, things will continue to move on. Yes, it'll be um, stressful for them because, because of the type of work I do and I only do it. So maybe that's why, but it's almost like it feels like this obligation to continue
Like
to
you're
do what
letting
I
them
do.
down.
Yes.
You're letting them. It's always been like this for me. I was a retail employee at Toys R Us ages ago, and I left to go to a corporate job. And I felt bad putting in my notice at a job I'd been at for like 3 months, and I wasn't getting paid nearly as much as my coworkers, and I
Right.
still felt guilty. And I waited to the last possible second to tell my boss, and I just kind of, stood there anxiously, like, so, I got another job. Like we were breaking up, and I was breaking his heart or something. It was
Yeah.
very
I
strange.
profusely
I'm
apologize
so
and I
sorry
get
to do
teary
this.
eyed. Yeah. Yeah. I get teary eyed. I get and my emotions start pouring out. And I'm like, in the end, when you step back from it, it's a job,
It
like,
is. You're not curing cancer. There aren't little
I
children that are going
know.
to go hungry because you're leaving your
I
job
know.
probably. So, yeah, maybe you guys should do a special edition of how to quit your job and bring in an expert
That's a
who can
great
walk us through
idea.
it.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I see that Ava is writing it down and I love it. That will be a special segment because I think also just talking through some of these things because when we just go through it alone, we just don't even notice it. And then when you say it, you're just like, it's an aha moment, right? I didn't even think of, oh, yeah, it's just a job. This whole time I was thinking that exact thing you were talking about yesterday. And it's not like I'm going to quit my job or anything right now, but like just I knew I would have to eventually because all things do have to come to an end, right? At some point. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. And just the anxiety of thinking about it, right? Just the thought process gave me anxiety and stress. And why? Why? In the end, why?
So,
It's
so,
so weird.
so you think those people who are at their jobs for 20, 30 years are just people who couldn't get up the nerve to quit? You think they're just trapped there? We
Maybe.
should save them. You should save all of them. Do the special. Save those people.
But also I'm wondering if it's because it's like, some of us who grew up with like that, the previous generation before us ingraining into us that,
Work
it's an
ethic.
obligation, work
Yeah.
ethic and obligation, integrity. If you don't do,
Hmm.
like, and
I was one of those
because,
families. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
exactly. And so I'm wondering if that has something to do with it too.
Maybe.
And maybe we're growing into ourselves nowadays because we are kind of in between that previous generation that was just about it doesn't matter if you enjoy your work, you just do it.
It's what you
you
do, and then you
you keep
retire
the
at
same
65.
career
Yeah.
forever.
Hmm.
Yeah. And then we're in that newer generation where we're finding ourselves, we're finding that, there can be more than just the 9 to 5 for the rest of your life. There's ways to explore and enjoy your life instead of just focusing on one thing just because you went to college for it back in your, you know, teens and early 20s. So
Back when you were a
just,
teenager and made a decision that would affect the whole rest of your life, as if you were
yes.
competent to make that decision at the time. Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
maybe that's why, I don't know.
No, I agree. The work ethic thing, which was totally ingrained in me, and the whole not growing up with a lot of money either. Like I was always raised with, you get some money, you hold on to it. You find a way to get some money, you hold on to that too. So there was also that terror of being broke and living in my car and things like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I think I resemble the older generation. And I might be one of those people who's been in a job for 25 plus years.
We're going to teach you how to quit. Don't worry. Somebody's going to come. Don't worry.
Eventually I'll quit. But I think it's also that generation, the older generation, is the idea that you're giving to the job or the profession or the career, whereas the current generation looks at it as a give and take. So you're giving of your time and energy, but you're taking something away, and you can take that into the next job and the next job. To basically create what you want or your dream at the end, which I think the previous generations didn't kind of.
Yeah, I've never been one to plot a career path. I hear people talk about it. My coworkers talk about, this is a good position for the next 5 years, and then I'll move on to the next thing. And I always think, I wonder what the next thing is. I have no idea. I just wait around till someone gives me a job because I have no idea how to career path.
Right.
Yeah. Well, but it happens to people, like people in my profession, when they retire or quit finally after 25 years, it's like being 18 again. So a lot of times, like even in their personal lives, they'll go through sort of like a midlife crisis because they're 18 again, trying to figure out what they want to be when they grow up and what that next thing is. Whereas,
well, I hope you get a convertible out of this soon to come midlife crisis.
See, I couldn't buy myself a car, so I just had an existential crisis just for months. Watching weird things and just going, why? Just watching weird movies, contemplating life, and not knowing how to solve anything. Well, Amy, thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing with us today, because I feel like your story can be relatable to so many, well, especially for me. I don't know about it, but I feel like it is very relatable because I have been through similar things like in other jobs as well. And I think, especially if you're like a hard worker and you're, kind and you are, you always try to be in a good mood and all this and all that. Like, I feel like it can be very easy for people to confide in you. And that's so relatable on so many levels.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a bit cathartic as well since I kept this terrible secret for so long, but yes, thank you.
Yay. I'm so glad this was cathartic for you. And thank you all so much for listening to Bad Boss Podcast. We will check back in with you next week. Bye. Do you have a Bad Boss experience you'd like to share with us? Visit our website, thebadbossjournal.com, to submit your story. You can also support our show by checking out our merch and more on our website. Thank you so much for listening to the Bad Boss Journal.